Hi, my name's Bill Sang, and this is the Bill Sang Podcast. Today we're starting a new segment called Made in Findlay, and I am here with a special guest, Brent Sleasman. He is the president at Winebrenner Theological Seminary. Brent, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Bill. Appreciate the invitation. And the first thing I have to say is, though, while the segment might be made in Findlay, I was made in Pennsylvania. So our family's very deliberate that we live in Findlay, but we're from Pennsylvania. But either way, we've been here long enough. We are committed to the city, and it is great to be here with you.
Awesome. And actually, that was going to be one of my first questions there is, Brent, are you originally from around here? So you're from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, about an hour southeast of Pittsburgh. And so if we got too deep into our sports affiliations, we probably would fall apart there. But yeah, grew up in southwest Pennsylvania. Actually came out to the University of Findlay, and so was an undergrad at the university. Went back to Pennsylvania in the Pittsburgh area. Served as a pastor, professor, and we've lived in the Philadelphia area, Pittsburgh area, and then prior to moving back to Findlay in 2015, lived in the Erie, Pennsylvania area.
Awesome. So it doesn't surprise me too much that you're from Pennsylvania. I'm a graduate from Winebrenner Theological Seminary, and I know there are lots of people from Pennsylvania. Now, Brent, why is it that there are so many people from Pennsylvania attending University of Findlay and Winebrenner Theological Seminary?
Well, the smart aleck answer is because Pennsylvania is awesome. But, I think that's a good question. So historically, the Churches of God, which founded the University of Findlay along with Winebrenner Seminary, and then obviously the Churches of God denominational office here in Findlay, historically started in central Pennsylvania in the Harrisburg area. And so as John Winebrenner and the movement began moving west, western Pennsylvania has deep roots. I know the church I grew up at, the Indian Head Church of God, at one point, I know my father was a Findlay College grad at that point, and there were several from his family and several from the church, and partly the church connection. And then once you knew somebody that came out, just a lot of people, especially education majors. Yeah. Interestingly, the house we live at here in Findlay, as we were in the process of buying it several years ago, realized that the former owner is from the same town that I'm from in Pennsylvania.
Oh my goodness.
Was a school administrator here in Findlay, and actually talking to my mother, he was my father's college roommate.
Oh my goodness.
Here in Findlay. And so yeah, it's a small world, but yeah, historical roots, denominational roots, and then like a lot of times once you know folks that go somewhere, it just kind of builds a train to that school.
And you guys have a tendency to take our quarterbacks too, I hear.
Yes, we do. And recently retired, but big fan of the Steelers.
Big fan of the Steelers.
Yeah, good Findlay Steeler connection there.
You know, I think that Findlay's had a bumpy relationship with them, but I think that all is well ends well.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yes.
So that's awesome. So did you ever see yourself being a president of a seminary?
No, not at all. I was a University of Findlay graduate and knew that Winebrenner was here. Felt some sense of call when I was in high school, and so went from the university to Winebrenner Seminary. But I entered the seminary really with the assumption that when God called me, it would be to be a pastor, to return to Western Pennsylvania, and so just really expected that was going to be our path. And then it was actually, ironically, during my time at Winebrenner, preparing to be a pastor to go back to Pennsylvania, that I really got a sense that God might be working in me a path more toward higher education. Mm-hmm. And so I did serve as a pastor, church planter in the Pittsburgh area, but knew at some point would be serving in an educational setting. And so that's really been where I've been at. But I was a tenured faculty member at a school in Erie prior to coming here, and that it was a great school and really could have seen myself staying there long term. I was there 7 years, so no.
Oh wow.
It wasn't something like, I circled, hey, by the time I'm this old, I want to serve in this capacity. When God opened the door, like many times, some folks encouraged it, and here we are.
So you expected to be a pastor. How did that call look like to higher education?
So I remember it was actually Dave Draper, my predecessor and faculty member at Winebrenner, was teaching a formational leadership course. And we had a variety of assignments, discerning call. And it was really during that, I think that course in my second year, second semester, second year, so I had 1 year left at the seminary, that I knew something was happening. And so we had assignments where you could visit a church council, just to understand kind of the inner workings of the the functioning of the administration of a church. And I happened to be student representative to faculty for the student fellowship that we had at that point. And just everybody likes, it's why little kids like to be teachers, because, teachers are what they're really familiar with from kindergarten up through. But there was something else in those environments that I enjoyed it. I liked the academic aspect of it. And so it was a forming over a period of time. But really, as we started to get into trying to discern that in writing. And then I was invited to teach a couple classes at Owens Community College, University of Findlay, at that point. And so just really found those environments to be great. If I think about how long ago that's been, it makes me feel old. But it was great to teach those courses. And so, it was just really a process, and realized that, so when we moved to the Pittsburgh area, realized in the process probably more school. At that stage, definitely, if you wanted to be in an academic setting, in an undergrad setting or so on, PhD would be useful. So I went back to Duquesne University as well about 20 years ago is when I started that. So PhD program at Duquesne, worked through that. And so that really helped clarify that was the path eventually that I would end up in.
So you graduated from Winebrenner Theological Seminary as well, correct? What year was that?
So I graduated from the university in 1996. It was the first December graduation. So that was December of 96. Graduated from Winebrenner in May of 1999. So that was at the old facility. We're not too far from it now.
We're just right across the
long
street,
before they moved to the University of Findlay campus and the building they're at now.
So what do you think of that new campus? I mean, I know things have changed and everything, but what are your thoughts from where it was to where it is right now?
And, it's interesting. I was just talking to somebody yesterday so I went to the building. We had classes during the day. We had chapel. We had, student fellowship. We rarely had an evening class, in part because faculty didn't want to teach them, nothing was online. Everything was in person. And so I graduated in 99, and in 2003 is when Winebrenner moved to the other building. I started in my role now in 2015. And by the time I started, there was enough of a gap that none of the faculty members who I had as a student were at Winebrenner. And so it was the same school in name, the same school in history. There were some support staff folks that were there in roles. But as far as my faculty experience, I had no memory as a student in the building we're in now. So it created something, unique. You always think about going back to the school that you're from, but nothing was familiar in that regard. But the building's beautiful. Built in 2003. I remember we came out for the grand opening just to be a support. And so, it's a great building to be a part. And now it's owned by the University of Findlay, which is working well.
That's good. That's good. I remember when they tore down Glenwood Middle School, and I went to Glenwood Middle School when it was still the old building, and to see them erect that gigantic, huge building out there, that was something else. I'd never been in it, and also I had the same experience. I graduated from Cleveland State University, and when I was out there, there wasn't a whole lot to it. In fact, huge commuter college, 17,000 people in the college, and the vast majority of them commuted. And when I left there, they decided that they wanted to bring more students onto campus. And so last time I was out there, wouldn't even recognize it. So I imagine the culture shock of the transformation of Winebrenner from the way you remember it to where it is now. You mentioned about faculty there for a minute. And who were the faculty when you were in Winebrenner?
So New Testament was Dr. Rezegi, Jim Rezegi.
Rezegi, yeah.
Old Testament was Dr. Stolman, who's still around.
I was wondering.
Teaching at the University of Findlay now, so I see Lewis from time to time. Theology was Gene Krutzinger. Church history was Bob Saucier. The formational and some of the practical ministry courses, Joyce Thornton and Connie Cherry. Dave Welker was leading the chapel, still pastor at College First. So, and for anyone from that era, the list of names I just gave, they said, yep, because they were there several years, but the strength of a seminary, especially one that's anchored in Scripture and Jesus, it really rises and falls based upon how strong your New Testament professor is. And so, all the faculty, Krutzinger, Stolman, they all had a good influence. But I would say definitely Dr. Rezegi is probably the one sitting in his class. I thought that's watching him teach and just his love for the material was something that was inspiring to think that a life in the academy could be something to be a part of, which was good.
I was very blessed to have Resigi his last year, maybe even his last class.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. I was there in the transition because I believe it went from Resigi to Sweeney, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think there was a year or so that there was someone else in the transition, but yeah, Dr. Sweeney has been there. And again, I think he, the strength of a school with your New Testament professor, and he is fantastic.
I was blown away in his class, and
because he's so laid back and quiet. Now, I will say, for those listening, he is a New England Patriots fan, which is very disheartening. But I haven't found yet, but I read closely, I don't think that's going to keep him out of heaven.
Ooh.
But if I
You're
found
really
that
going
passage,
out on a limb there.
Yeah, I know. If I found that passage, I'd have to say it wouldn't be a surprise. But yeah, but no, Jim is great.
I think that boils down to your stance on Tom Brady, really.
This could take a turn in a whole other direction right now.
I was going to ask about predestination or free will. This might be a deeper conversation right here. Yes, and my goodness, I remember the faculty when I was at Winebrenner, and I completely agree with you. You know, I thought about the different places where I could have gone to seminary, and I don't know that I could have picked somewhere better, honestly. And I'm not saying that just out of flattery or anything like that. You know, I remember my professors. I had Gary Stats. Mm-hmm. My goodness. Dr. Fry, incredible professor right there. Dr. Sweeney, Resigi. Brandon Withrow is no longer there, but he was a great professor as well. Dr. Helleman. Mm-hmm. So, all great professors. And I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this question right here in relation to the faculty, because Winebrenner is very unique, I think, in terms of how it selects faculty. Do you think so?
Yeah, you know, and so when I went to Duquesne University, it was with the intention to be thinking about being a faculty member, training to be a faculty member. And so I went through grad school in that regard, really with an eye on being a faculty member. And so I've taught at several different schools in full-time capacity. Like I said, I was a tenured faculty member, so have deep familiarity with the academic life and what a faculty member does day in and day out. I think the humbling part for a president is, now I know I referenced Dr. Draper, but notice I referenced him as a faculty member, not in his role as a president, which he did a great job. The humbling thing for a president is most students, and then what have we been spending the last few minutes talking about, is the memory of their faculty.
Yes.
That they,
yes.
Now they might have had a really, somebody that helped a student with a financial concern, or somebody that really helped them discern their call in the admissions process. All of those people, are tremendously helpful. But I think most of us really boil it down, our undergrad years, our grad years, seminary. Who did you have as a faculty member? And so, I think that the beautiful thing, and this is true of many schools, Winebrenner, we have 6 full-time faculty members currently, and so it's a small faculty, so it's important to have, strong teachers, strong people of faith, and the Board of Trustees is active, and so trying to find the right fit organizationally, the right fit theologically, and just making sure that folks are engaged in that process. So so Winebrenner is unique because we're familiar with it. But when you look at the landscape of education, our process isn't that different from what you see at other schools. Especially, there's a selection process. Faculty are affirmed by the Board of Trustees, and so it's a great process to be a part of.
Well, I guess what I was getting at there is what I found very fascinating at Winebrenner is Winebrenner's Church of God, denominationally speaking. And yet, while I was there, I had such an incredible diversity among the teaching staff. Jim Davison, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was a Church of Christ. You had Dr. Gary Stats, who was an American Baptist. Dr. Fry, who was Lutheran. Janine Grimm, Lutheran. I know I had several Church of God. Baumgartner, Helleman, United Church of Christ. Just an incredible diversity of denominations represented at Winebrenner among the staff and also among the students. To me, that was one of the most incredible things about that experience.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a good point, especially when we take a look at the last couple years. All those things you just mentioned, it's a diversity of views, and yet there still can be unity of mission and direction working together. And my fear is, and this is true of the church, and we don't need to go in that direction broadly, but that's, even in the last 10 years, the risk is that we're losing some of that. How can we be united with a common mission when we may not come from the same history, the same background? We joke, but cheer for the same sports teams. We're from the same states, and yet we can sit here and have a conversation and say, on the fundamentals, the most important things, we're in agreement, so let's work together.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's schools like Winebrenner, and again, there are other schools, but I think that's one of the strengths, that folks come from a variety of perspectives, and yet on the essentials, we're in agreement. And that's really, for me, that's the key.
Yeah, and that's a very tough thing to do, to have a faculty that is as diverse. And I just remember all the different views. Dr. Fry, who's a lot more traditional, less traditional ones as well. And yet we gathered for chapel. And we all sang together. We all fellowshiped together. We all got along. I mean, it was a really, really incredible experience.
Yeah, and that's my desire as well, as far as we can have a strong connection to a denomination. And from my vantage point, we have as strong of a relationship with the churches of God as we've ever had. But we still have 20 or 30 denominations of students. We have a diversity of faculty, and the role of Jesus as being central, built as Jesus is revealed in Scripture. That's still the foundation. So I think by having a very strong sense of what our foundation is, some of the diverse conversations, it really enriches that environment.
Yeah. So where do you see Winebrenner going now, as far as, this is a different world from when either one of us was in seminary. Where do you see Winebrenner going as a seminary?
Well, and I think before we look forward, and that's back to the foundation, I think one of the things that I want to make sure that nobody can say on my watch is that we veered from that foundation. So keeping Jesus central, making sure that as we talk about Scripture, that's our anchor. And so a lot of people, and for the purpose of this, it makes sense, but a lot of people, when I engage them, they're concerned with where we're going. And there are times to say, well, let's start with where we are, where we've been, and make sure we've got our anchor right. And so then all those things, whether it's online, you look at the last 2 years of COVID protocols and students in person, thinking about online for a moment. Prior to COVID, most of Winebrenner's courses, we were moving more online, but still most of them, I think, had in-person elements. We had about 8 states represented within those courses. Now that we have about students from 20 states.
Oh, wow.
Because we were forced online. And so, as we take a look, faculty, administration, we take a look and say, even in the last 2 years, the world that we were serving with the education, in early 2020, that world doesn't even exist anymore. No. So I think the anchor is so important because it lets us be responsive to those environments. So we talk about our mission at Winebrenner, equipping leaders for service in God's kingdom. We have a vision statement, helping Christ-focused servants transform the world. And so that whole conversation about what's it mean then to be about vision, well, what does that look like? But our strategic plan currently that we're working with talks about collaboration, contextualization, and creating communities of learners. And so I think, where are we headed? And it breaks my heart in a sense, because my experience, I came from Pennsylvania. I was with students that relocated. You're from the Findlay area, but you were with students still, and there were still remnants of those who had moved, and that was the latter days by that point, in that regard. But those days are gone. It's the exception now that somebody physically relocates, and so on one hand we could try to dig our heels in and say we have this beautiful facility that we have access to. Findlay has a lot of great places to live, and we could do that. But the choice that we've made, and that I'm very supportive of, is we're going to be responsive to what we're perceiving the needs. I love the fact that the majority of our students are anchored in their church, and that's a key thing, anchored in their church. So how can we collaborate with them? How can we contribute to their spiritual journey? One of the big things, I think, it's not a shift, but just a mindset, is viewing seminary as discipleship. And really thinking about not just, sometimes the word rigor, I think, is really the pivot word there. Some people think about rigor and interpret it as difficult. Rigor also could mean thorough. Yeah. And so somebody in their discipleship journey could have a very rigorous experience. It doesn't mean it's hard. It just means it's thorough. Jesus didn't need us to be smarter. He needed us to be obedient. And I think schools like Winebrenner can play a part in that. And so I think, looking forward, we'll continue to train and equip. We'll continue to have students who are preparing to serve as pastors, missionaries, counselors. We also have a clinical counseling program. And so we'll continue to be part of that conversation. But I think the growing conversation is part of the spiritual restlessness of people who say that Jesus is at work, and I want discipline means both. The root for discipline is the same as the root for disciple. And so in order to be a disciple, we need to think about that discipline. So structured learning, hey, for 12 weeks, I just want to submit to, someone like Dr. Sweeney and learn more about the New Testament. And we're beginning to see more students who are really just taking a step to get deeper into their own discipleship and spiritual journey. We could talk grand plans, vision. Are there benchmarks and specifics? There are. But I think it's more about being faithful to who God's called us to be, making sure our priorities are right, being responsive to the circumstances, recognizing we're part of folks' discipleship journeys, and then praying that it's God's kingdom, that as long as we're faithful, the resources, the students, and the path will continue to unfold in front of us.
Yeah, and I think that's very wise too. One of the things in leadership training that I remember learning is to not be wed to the plan so much, because plans are great and they can be attractive, but being focused on the goals, the outcomes, and ultimately we want to create disciples for Jesus Christ. And what I really see as you're talking about the reality that now Winebrenner is seeing students from 20 different states is that despite that distance learning, people are going to be focusing more locally in ministry. Does that make sense at all?
The word that comes to mind is the word community.
Yeah.
And so when you and I went through Winebrenner and we sat in class with folks, the community we had as a seminary student was with the other students in that classroom.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. I mean, I still have friends that I talk to. Lance Findlay went through it, a year ahead, but I lived with Lance for a while. So the folks that we were in community with were the ones that we were around. And so I think where I see a major shift is, so let's say that we have one or even, a handful of students from a particular church or context. They're in a class with students from, 10 other states. And so they're not going to have the same community that we had. You can have community online. That anybody listening, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. You can have community online. However, I think the emphasis for a school like Winebrenner is recognizing the shift is more local. It's saying, hey, you three from the church in Iowa, what we really need to think about is help you conceptualize what does community look like for you in that context, so that when you come together on a weekly class or a Zoom session, when you're doing the discussion boards, you're probably not going to have community the same way that Bill and I had it when we were seminary students, but we need to make it local. We need to think about it. And for me, even thinking about that idea of transformation, helping Christ-focused servants transform the world, Galatians 5 and the fruit of the Spirit, it's I think about transformation in terms of when I go home, when I walk in my house tonight, we have 3 kids, I'm married, 3 kids, is the house more peaceful when I'm there? Peace, patience, kindness, goodness, the 9 fruit. And so do we bring that? And that's something that becomes evident in our local context. And so, trying to think about a school like Winebrenner, how do we invest in folks so that their local context, the word there is community, but it's very different from what community looked like whenever you were rubbing shoulders with, 10, 20 other students in a class. But it's a mind shift to get to that point.
I mean, there's so much we can unravel right there with what you just said. But ultimately, I really see God's hand at work as you mentioned those things. We're going to get a little bit more fun right now in terms of what was your favorite class then, and have you taken any classes recently?
So for those that listen and like the fact check, you mentioned Dr. Helleman.
Yeah.
So just to speak about Catherine for a moment. So she was a faculty member some years ago, and then she was at Winebrenner whenever I started, but she was in an administrative role in the academic area, has served in a variety of academic roles, and then returned to faculty. So she wasn't part of my Winebrenner experience. But for those saying, well, wait, she's part of faculty. So she's transitioned from faculty into administration, back into faculty. And so anybody that takes a look at the website, you'll see her actually listed as faculty member now. It's interesting. I've not taken any courses at Winebrenner recently, and I've not sat in a classroom for a 4-credit course. since, good grief, 2007. And so that was the last finishing up coursework for my PhD. So I've done lots of trainings, but not a formal course. But favorite Winebrenner course, Rezagy had an influence collectively. But I would say probably if I had to single out a course, Gene Krutzinger's, I remember Christian Ethics, Systematic Theology. Those are probably the courses. And so I didn't realize growing up, Southwest Pennsylvania, Churches of God, I didn't realize how borderline fundamentalist, in that environment, very poor county. My dad was a school teacher. My mom stayed at home. I have two older sisters. And I was just talking to somebody about this today. It raised the conversation point that it was my junior or senior year of high school that I realized I didn't have any friends whose parents were divorced. And it was just, maybe was that sheltered? I don't know what that was, but it created a very unique environment in that context. And so working through whether it's ethics or theology was just really, it was challenging, recognizing both in the affirmative sense of saying that all these things that I just didn't know I believed, it actually, brought language to that. But then at the same time, challenging on some things and thinking, yeah, I never thought about this before. So yeah, I would say probably Gene Krutzinger.
Probably Gene Krutzinger.
Yeah.
What's your favorite book in the Bible?
I love John's Gospel.
Oh yeah, you're copping out now. John's everybody's favorite.
No.
That's okay. It's my favorite too.
Yeah,
so
that makes it acceptable. Well, I think, let me defend myself then. When you take a look, we think a lot about politics, we think about history, we think, about geopolitical situations, and so we know all those dynamics that are going on in the first century. What we don't often think about is what was happening in the communication environment. In the sense that there was a transition around John's time, and this doesn't happen overnight, so it's decades and centuries in the making. But there was a transition during John's time of moving from the spoken word to the written word. And so Walter Ong is a great scholar that works with this. And so when you think about what the spoken word is, and obviously it's a podcast, so nobody can see, so just work with me here. But, when I say the word hello, for example, you can't see me say that. You can hear it, but it doesn't physically appear anywhere. Now, if I took a pencil and wrote the word hello, then you could physically see it. And so if you follow that, what's happening is that when I transition from speaking to writing, I'm taking, when I say hello, it's invisible. But when I write it, it becomes visible. And so what's happening is that word hello is transitioning from invisible to visible. And so the people in the first century were very self-aware that something was happening in terms of spoken versus written writing. And so for John to use the term word to reference Jesus, he's making other points, and logos means other things as well. Yeah. But one of the points that you can support that John is making is that a very simple way to think about who Jesus was with the arrival of Jesus, what was once invisible is becoming visible. And so the use of that term word is John's way of making commentary on the communication environment of the first century and people who read that. And so when we think about Christmas in terms of Jesus was invisible, now he's visible, John fits right in there. And for me, that's such a powerful way to think about that first chapter. In the beginning was the Word. And then you look at, 1 John and some of the use of that phrasing as well. The first 4 verses of 1 John chapter 1 are fascinating as well. But yeah, so I would say the Gospel of John, but it's because it kind of intersects. My academic training at Duquesne was in some of the philosophical and theoretical aspects of human communication. And so that's why, that really just resonates with me.
Oh man, you just totally blew my theory that you're copping out of the water right there at the Duquesne thing. My goodness, that was far deeper of an answer than I was expecting. So
I'm sorry.
I'm going to give you an opportunity to redeem yourself. What's your favorite verse in the Bible?
I remember we were asked, at a youth camp. It might have been on the university back when they had Impact. and workshop. And I remember, I think it's in Ecclesiastes though, that this idea that all streams flow into the sea, but the sea is never full. And I remember I'm reading, trying to scour for a verse, and I just remember finding that and being overwhelmed by this sense of, just the logistics of that. How can all the streams flow into the sea, and yet the sea not be full? And just that sense of God's creation and his presence. And so, if I go back 30 some years, it was probably me copying out at that point as a teenager, just, I'm going to pick that. But, but reflecting on that since then, it just, it's a powerful image for me that, I get the science behind it. But the poetry and the imagery that everything flows into the oceans. But, you think about how does the sea not overflow? And just somehow God has designed this infinite system that is sustaining.
We'll say it's John 3:16.
That's the right answer.
But that's, like I said, much, much deeper than I would have come up with right there.
Ecclesiastes 1:7.
Ecclesiastes 1:7. All right. So I think I already know the answer to this one. So what would you say? Would you say, do you believe in Arminianism, Calvinism, or free will versus predestination as it relates to salvation?
Yeah, I would lean toward free will.
Free will?
Arminianism, free will. Any of these are good. The issue becomes one of priority. And so I think, I think about that framework quite a bit, because Arminianism, Calvinism, those are both good. I'm not of the framework that one is evil. However, you can find both on either side that would suggest that the other side is not just wrong, they're wrong, But so it's an open-handed commitment. That's never going to be a deal breaker. And it saddens me when on that issue for some folks that they're so adamant about a position that becomes the deal breaker.
But as president of Winebrenner, let me clarify, you have to say free will, otherwise you get fired, right?
No, my free will would permit me to say that if I was, and that's the fortunate thing. But I think there's a generous orthodoxy in the sense that we can be evangelical and orthodox and say either Arminian or Calvinist. There's fallacies and heresies on both sides.
I've been on quite a journey with all that, and there was a book I read around the time I was in seminary called Arminianism. I think it was called 10 Myths and the Truth or something like that by Roger Olson. A very good book. In fact, after reading that, it made it so clear that speaking of the origins of both theologies, Calvinism and Arminianism, that when you look at them, they're just, it's seriously like splitting a hair as far as the difference. More or less, the Arminianism just sides just a little bit more on the side of free will, and they say that essentially that God's election of the saints is a mystery because it respects free will. But then on the Calvinistic side, it almost seems as though that they decide just a little bit more on the idea of unconditional election, and then the free will aspect of it is a mystery. Would that be accurate? Am I right?
I'm comfortable. Yes, I'm comfortable with that. And Olson's a great resource. And I think, Bill, and you know this, and I think that, we think about Arminianism, Calvinism, they're named after humans 1,500 years, after the time of Jesus. Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that, we look through the Gospels. The Gospel of John never mentions, so there is that element that we're trying to put frameworks and structures upon Scripture, something that I think you could also make the point that Scripture was never intended to be reduced to these categories. And so anytime that if I say I'm reading Scripture as an Arminian, I've just elevated, and again, the issue of priority, I've elevated my Arminianism above what Scripture says. And I think,
yes.
And this is just in one example, but we love to say, I heard it in church on Sunday, and it's true that God's love's unconditional. Yeah. And so work with me, and anyone can quote me. I used to tell my students, just make sure you quote me accurately. So, however, when we look at Scripture, I see all kinds of conditions on God's love. And so, to say something like that, regardless of our position, and say, well then, if we're not universalists, which I am not, then there are conditions in God's love. And so then where do we draw the line of saying God's love is unconditional? And so, finding that balance to say anybody can respond Absolutely, but there are timelines. They're God's timelines, and so speaking as a Reformed Calvinist for a moment, God's ways are not my ways, and so there are things that He has designed that are way beyond my control, my pay grade, and I don't get to judge. That's in God's providence on that. So I think and that's scriptural. We don't know the time, but yeah, things like, but we say things all the time. Yeah. Well, God's love's unconditional. Well, John, the Gospel of John, I think there's places that Jesus equates love and obedience. Yep. And so if we're not obedient, are we really loving? We want to give kids, everything they want, and everybody gets a participation trophy, and we want people to feel good. And those aren't bad things in and of themselves. But when they creep into our theology, no, there are conditions. Yeah. But they need to be God's conditions, not what we put on. And that's my concern as well. I mean, we're losing space sometimes because everybody, whether it's politics or faith, everybody leads with some ism. I read scripture through different lenses as well, but trying to figure out how do we read what the gospel writers, and again, noting that they were decades removed from when Jesus walked. Everybody wants the Twitter, whatever letters, how many characters it is right now, but we can't live lives of faith in a very truncated, abbreviated format. Yeah.
And I have to say, I appreciate everything you just said right there. And it reminds me of probably the thing that was impressed on me the most at Winebrenner Theological Seminary. The thing that I learned there that I think that was indispensable, that I don't think that I could have gotten from anywhere else. Aside, we already talked about the faculty and all that stuff, so lots of other things, incredible things about it. But the number one thing I think that I learned out there is how to truly read the Bible, how to truly read it. Because of all the different views, I said, okay, from now on when I read this, I can't read it as an Arminian or as a Calvinist or a dispensationalist or anything like that, or or in the lens of a sermon that I heard somebody give, but I gotta read it as it is written, and I need to make sure that I'm not isolating chapter and chapter and chapter. Read it all together. I remember the day when that started to dawn on me, and it was just the most incredible experience. And I tell you what, because of just that experience alone, I would not in a million years choose any other seminary than Winebrenner. So if you're listening, I highly endorse Winebrenner Theological Seminary. But Brent, you are not off the hook yet, because you are a president of a seminary right now. And my wife and I, on our last podcast episode, we did something really fun, okay? I had her, we tested each other, we quizzed each other.
Oh, jeez.
And yes.
Yeah, I'm going to lose.
Okay.
I'm not good at this.
Don't worry, I lost too. And I'm only going to give you one of the 4 questions that we did.
Gosh.
You see, we did a test.
You're going to edit this one out. Right?
This is going to be in there every glorious moment.
I was a Bible quizzer in high school because they needed somebody to fill out the team. I was not good. I tried to be formed by the word, but I've not memorized. Anyway, yeah.
So the 4 questions that we did, and I'm going to give you one of them. It's going to be the hardest one.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah.
It was the 12 disciples, all their names. That's really hard, especially since some of them have multiple names. The 10 Commandments, all the New Testament books in order, and the one you're getting, all the Old Testament books in order.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and Ezekiel. Here's where minor prophets.
That's what I said too.
Minor prophets. Sorry, you're not minor because you're unimportant.
Oh, there's one word that's not minor though.
Yeah, wait. Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel. Yeah, this is where.
At least I don't think he's considered minor. I could be wrong with that.
I say Isaiah.
You did say Isaiah, yeah. It's smaller, but it's not minor.
Daniel.
There you go.
Daniel, Hosea, Joel, and Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi.
Woo! Wow, very good. That deserves a high five.
Well, you helped me there. Whenever you gave me I didn't even see it. All right.
Oh man,
but I passed that.
I would say that's a pass. Yes,
right.
You passed it. So my wife and I, we both failed that. If you didn't hear our last podcast episode, Brent just aced it by all,
right.
and for all intents and purposes. Yes, I did help him with Daniel there.
Well, I didn't see it. Yeah, but saying he's kind of a major. Yeah. Once I got. I think, I don't know if there was a song in Bible school, like, because there's a.
You did that pretty fast.
Well, there's like a lyrical sense to it. Yeah. So I don't know if there was some song that we learned. So anyway, yeah.
Well, that was awesome.
I learned it then, and it saved the day.
There you go. So if you need to know the books of the Bible in order, go to Winebrenner Theological Seminary. They'll make sure that you're getting a good Bible education. You might not be able to name all the books in order by the time you're done, but you will learn a lot of really important stuff. Well, Brent, I would like to thank you so much for joining us today on the Bill Sang podcast. Do you have anything you'd like to share with people before we sign off here?
Quickly, you were saying about just some of your experiences as a student in that realization. And what brought to mind was Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Old Testament, Dr. Stuhlman's class, and just that reading, just chapter after chapter. But it was somewhere, I don't know if it was in Abraham or Moses' story, somewhere in there, that overwhelming sense that the same God that they prayed to and that called them was the same God we pray to now. And, just that moment of just not being able to comprehend that. So, we look at all these amazing things that God did through the Old Testament books and creation, and realize that who we're talking to when we pray and where we're living life is the exact same God. So no, I appreciate the invitation, and would love to talk to anybody who's listening to this. I'm easy to find through Winebrenner's website. And if there's anything that's worth more conversation, I'd love to do that. Appreciate the invitation. This is great.
Awesome. I appreciate your time, Brent. It was a fun time. Lots of things that I can remember. Oh, went down memory lane a little bit there for both of us, I imagine. That was fantastic. So thank you once again. Thank you for listeners for joining us. This is the Bill Sang podcast. I'm Bill Sang, and my guest today was Dr. Brent Sleasman.